ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Dinozor Gaming, where we learn to be a better player. Today, we are doing a deck tech on Supreme Leader Snoke, one of the new leaders from Legends of the Force, and honestly, one of my all-time favorite leaders. If anyone has been following the channel for any time, you'll notice that I am a big fan of Tarkin from set 1. I've been playing it from the start with a fairly decent competitive success, and Snoke plays fairly similarly. And honestly, Snoke was my runner-up for what leader to bring to the Galactic Championships before making a last-minute switch over to Talzin. But I can't complain, I did fairly well as is. Now, on to Snoke himself. Today we're going to be talking about using him in the aggression aspect for a base. And so let's go ahead and jump in. So what does Snoke do? Of course, you pay 1 to give an experience to a unit. This is an ability we have seen very often in the game, this time with a slightly different condition. Instead of needing to do it on an Imperial unit, it's instead going to be on a villainy unit, which is a lot less limiting, considering that most units are split between heroism and villainy, with of course some neutrals. So probably something like 40% of all units in general are villainy. That gives you a lot of options to build Snoke. However, your experience that you'll be giving is going to always go on the unit that has the most power. And that is a limiting factor. It is kind of putting all of your eggs in one basket, but a good player will be able to manipulate that. It is a lot easier to put the experience where you want it than you would initially believe. As for the bases, honestly, I think there's room to use pretty much any red base you could want. The main options that I've presented here are, of course, the Force base, the basic 30 health base, or Tarkin Town. So today we're going to be looking at 2 lists in particular. And the 2 lists are going to be the Force base, a Force deck, and a non-Force deck. Tarkin Town is there because it is just overall a fantastic red base, and while I don't think it is the correct approach for a general deck, it does make some of your matchups better. It does help you win against Hantu Blue, for example, but it does make you considerably weaker against aggro decks, and that is already something that this deck is not great at. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the deck list. We're not here to waste anybody's time, and don't worry, the deck lists will be in the description below. And the first one we're going to be looking at right now is going to be the Force variant, and I'm going to preface this by saying there is not a lot of Force payoff, unfortunately, in these colors, at least not any that are worth playing. The main one that we'd want to use is Darth Tyrannus. Is it worth it to have to play some Force cards just for Tyrannus? The answer is maybe, and the main reason for that is because you're going to be running a lot of Force units anyways. You're going to be running Grand Inquisitor, you're going to be Snoke himself is Force. Most of your later on units that have ambush are Force, so you'll be generating it without issue, especially with other good ways to generate it, like Acolyte of the Beyond. And so the question is more about, is it worth sacrificing 2 health on your base for Darth Tyrannus, and to a much lesser extent, 8th Brother? Of course, there are some other Force payoffs that you can use, like Sorcerous Blast, and we'll be talking about that a bit later as well. But I think just overall, this is the list that I've had the most success with. It is pretty good, and it works fairly similarly to the second list that we're going to check out right away, and it's going to be Forceless Snoke, essentially. It is almost the same list. There is no Tyrannus. 8th Brother is not here, but 8th Brother is a decent card even without the Force. It's essentially a Vader for 1 less that doesn't search. So, yeah. All that said, I can't really say which of these 2 lists is better, because they are both just stronger in certain situations. Tyrannus himself can almost always go 2 for 1, which helps you a lot in the early game, but the necessity of generating the Force and having it early enough makes it so it's not a easy decision to make. All that said, I'm going to also caveat this, that this list, both of these lists are actually using Force Throw, and the main reason for why is, of course, Force Throw is a fantastic card, very strong overall. I think any deck that has any Force units should be using it, and now that we have access to a lot of good Force units, I think it's a no-brainer. That said, I don't think it's a necessity for this deck, and if in the future Force Throw does get suspended or rotated out or anything of the sort, I think this deck might actually become stronger due to your opponents not having access to it. You don't need it as a deck. So first, let's talk about the core of the deck. What are the cards that make this deck good? Of course, the obvious ones are going to be the key cards, which are going to be Craving Power and Overwhelming Barrage. Overwhelming Barrage we have had since set 1. We've already known that it's up there and potentially one of the strongest, if not the strongest card in the game. Being locked behind Command Villainy is the only reason why we don't see it in every single deck. And now Craving Power is more or less the same thing, slightly different in that you cannot spread out the damage, but instead the +2/+2 is permanent. And that is extremely good. And having access to 6 of these pretty much guarantees that at the turn where you're going to either flip your leader or just in general the 5 resource turn, you will have access to one of these 2. And if your opponent does not play around it, you just run away with the game at that point. These cards are fantastic, and I think it is worth building an entire deck around them, and I found that Snoke is the deck that uses them the best. Now, of course, we cannot be talking about Command Villainy without talking about Vader himself. And I think everybody knows how good Vader is. And for those who don't, really quickly, he's a 5/7 ambush, and he searches the top 10 for any number of villainy cards that cost 3 or less. And hey, your entire deck is going to be essentially villainy. So it just means search the top 10 for any 3 cost or less and play it. And on top of that, he's getting rid of a unit. Almost always trades 2 for 1, sometimes even 3 for 1. A fantastic card that works exceptionally well in this deck. Of course, we also have Super Laser Technician. Ramp has been pretty much the core identity of Command, especially Command Villainy. And considering that this is also a villainy card, there's not much reason to not play Super Laser Technician. However, I think it's a bit less obvious in its uses as other decks, where you don't always want to ramp with this deck. We'll elaborate on that a bit further, but I just think it's just a staple, nice green villainy card that you want in any deck. Next up, we have one of the MVPs of the deck, Purge Trooper. This was revealed to not much fanfare, and honestly, it is underrated. If you paid attention to any of the lists from the Galactic Championship this weekend, you'll see a lot of decks, including some of the winning Talzin lists, were playing some Purge Troopers just because that 4/2 stat line for 3 is not that bad. And on top of that, being able to deal 2 damage to a force unit, which is a vast majority of the current units in the game that are being played on the ground, makes it really good. If you can bring him down and kill something, and then your opponents need to answer this, that's pretty much already a 2 for 1. Yes, the 2 health is a hindrance, but often enough, it's not enough for them to kill it for free. They'll need to spend some resources to get rid of it. Of course, Grand Inquisitor being another one of the new 3 drops. He is a fantastic card. It is hidden. He has raid 1. It's essentially a 3 cost 4/4. Very premium stat lines. The other added effect of other Inquisitors having hidden is not very relevant. We don't usually play other Inquisitors, with the exception of sometimes playing 8th Brother. We have HK47, 2 cost 2/4. It's become the new standard for good 2 drops, and this is no exception. On top of that, what makes this extremely good is that this is a deck that will very often be fighting for the board tooth and nail, and every time you defeat a unit, you'll be dealing a damage to your opponent's base. And if you have this out early on and they haven't been able to kill it on the turns where you are doing Overwhelming Barrage, you're sometimes doing an extra 2 to 3 damage to their base, and that damage adds up very fast. A lot of decks just don't have inherent restore available to them, so if you're just pitching away at them bit by bit, it's enough for your late game cards to finish out the game. On top of that, a 2 cost 2/4 that is a villainy that can be buffed. Fantastic. And speaking of 2 cost 2/4s, we have Vanay. I'm so sorry if I said that name wrong, but this card is exceptional. Everything that I said about HK still applies here. However, on top of that, when played and on attack, you can defeat an experience token on a friendly unit. If you do, give an experience token to a friendly unit. That sounds like a very tame ability, but in this deck, it is so good, allowing you to move your experience around, allowing you to choose who your leader ability is going to buff, basically manipulating who is your highest power unit. If you manage to just move it around so that everyone has the same power level. You can put the experience wherever you want. And on top of that, it's not only when played, and it's also on attack, which means that you get to use the same experience token more than once in a turn. We'll go more into detail about how to do that later on, but just suffice it to say, a very short scenario is if you give an experience token to, for example, an HK 47 that you have in play, that HK attack steals 3, then your Vinay attacks, steals the experience from HK, puts it onto himself, and attacks for 3 as well. So that one experience token, which would normally only give you 1 damage, ended up giving you 2. Next up, we have Force Throw. As we mentioned, I think it would be silly to not play Force Throw in a deck that has access to Force units. Just an overall fantastic card. Could be used offensively to get rid of cards in their hand. It could be used defensively to just discard a Maul or a Vader and one-shot their leader. You'd be silly not to run this if you have access to it. That said, I don't think this deck needs it. There is definitely an argument to be made that the deck could run just as well without it. And of course, Dark Tyrannus. While you might not be playing the Force variant of the deck, if you are, this card is fantastic. It comes in, it kills something, it probably survives. If you kill something that has less than 3 attack, you get to ambush first, kill it, and then get a shield. And most decks don't have an easy way to bypass shields. And on top of that, he is villainy. You get to buff him up, make him stronger and stronger. Just a great card overall. So that's enough for the core of the deck. So let's talk about what makes this deck strong and what is it weak to. I mean, this is, first and foremost, a red-green deck. We've seen quite a few variations of that over the past year. The most obvious one being Sabine, as well as some variations of Anakin or Han or anything of the sort. We're going to need a bit more space, so let's remove this beautiful face of mine right here. All right, here we go. And so as for strength, so we mentioned the Overwhelming Barrage and Craving Power. I think they are the best tempo removal in the game by far. Being able to buff your unit and remove an opponent's threat in the same turn is fantastic. And the key thing about those two cards is that they are making your unit stronger, allowing for extremely high damage output without sacrificing your sturdy board state. And what I mean by that is if you are moving into the 5 resource turn, even if you chose to not attack last turn and you just took the initiative, you get to start off your turn with an Overwhelming Barrage, clear out whatever they have, and if they are not able to clear whatever unit you buffed, you're dealing a massive amount of damage. As opposed to a lot of other decks, when they're using their removal, like Takedown or Fell the Dragon, they are losing tempo in order to do it. Yes, of course, they are trading cards 1 for 1, but they are keeping the board state pretty even, whereas in your case, you are developing the board state and putting even more damage onto your opponent's base. Your leader is a solo threat. That is very important because we're moving into a game state, a game meta, where your leader in general is not a big deal. There are some exceptions to that, of course, in leaders like Anakin, for example. But most of the time, if you're looking at the big leaders like Han 2, Mother Talzin, even Quinlan, yes, they have decent stats, but they are not a big threat. If your opponent just leaves them around for a turn or two, they're not going to steal the game. Snoke is not like that. Snoke, every single turn, will keep growing and growing. Every single time he attacks, he gets to put an experience on himself, which is something that we haven't been seeing often with the other experienced leaders. So on the first turn that you flip him, of course he flips as a 4/7, but on the first attack, he becomes a 5/8. And on top of that, if you manage to put a Craving Power on top of him, he is immediately becoming a 6/9, attacking for a 7/10. If they do not have an immediate answer for this, he will steal the game for you immediately. Of course, next up we have any unit can become a threat, eats that opponent's removal. This has been true for a lot of the experienced leaders, maybe less so for Rey because you can't choose to keep buffing the same unit up. In Snoke you can. If you are in a late game situation where both people are just top decking cards, often enough it comes down to who can top deck the bigger unit. And Snoke lets any of your units become that big unit. A 2/4 drawn on turn 8 is not a big deal, but if you immediately turn that 2/4 into a 3/5, they don't deal with it. Next turn it is a 4/6, and that is only one of the cards that you drew. It really makes it so every single one of your units is an actual danger. They all need to be removed. Your opponent can't afford to just let your stuff stick around. And on top of that, if they do remove your stuff, very often it just eats away at their removal. I found that when I play this deck often enough, by turn 5 or 6, my opponent has used up a lot of their Fell the Dragons, their takedowns, things like that on my smaller stuff that I have buffed up, and that leaves room for my big boys to come in and not and basically kill off my opponent when they don't have any answers left. And of course, similar to what we've mentioned earlier, something we've mentioned in other videos, when you're playing villainy aggression, you have absolutely top tier reach. You have access to Ruthless Raider, you have access to Devastator. These are some of the best reach cards in the game. They not only help you deal damage to the base, develop your board, and put a sizable threat that your opponent needs to immediately deal with. Sometimes even that's not enough. In the case of Ruthless Raider, even if when it dies, it deals more damage. Just fantastic cards overall. Now on to the weaknesses. What is this deck weak to? Of course, we are talking about a red-green deck, and red-green has some difficulty in maintaining board control when you've already lost it. And what I mean by that is it's very hard if your opponent is clearing out your board. If you're playing versus a Mother Talzin, for example, and they are able to just kill whatever you put down and nothing is sticking, it is very hard for you to come back. And that is just straight up true for any deck running these colors. There's not much that just comes out of the hand and immediately blows out the board. It's just every aspect has its strengths and its weaknesses, and that is the same for this deck. Of course, no easy access to healing. Most of the healing in the game is unfortunately behind Vigilance. There is some access in Command, and there is going to be more in the future, I'm sure, but most of the time you won't have a way to heal easily, so if you've dealt damage early on to your base, it will likely stick. Yes, there is some cards that you could be using in order to heal up, like for example Reinforcement Walker or some of the other low drops that we'll talk about later, but in general they will not make your deck better, so often enough you won't play them unless you put them in your side. Your leader deploys at 6. We are playing a game where most good leaders are deploying at 5, and that makes you extremely slow. That gives your opponent an extra turn to prepare for your leader flip, so by the time your leader is out, if they are ready for it, if they have an answer for it, that puts you in a very bad situation. Luckily, you are playing Command, so you can ramp and make your 6 turn their 5 turn. Sometimes that feels like a necessity, but in most of the cases, it's not actually that big of a deal. But it is worth noting that this is quite a weakness of the deck, especially for a leader that just wants to stay out as long as possible. Deploying a turn later than most is a weakness. And of course, leader is very important. I think this is one of those decks where your leader, when deployed, matters a lot. We mentioned that in the strengths. So if your opponent is able to immediately kill it off with either a Rival's Fall or a Force Throw by discarding a giant unit or something like that, it hurts a lot. You often rely on your leader to take you from your average early game into your very strong late game. So that is a big weakness. And finally, in this color, there is quite a bit of struggle to deal with shields protection in general, and what I mean by protection is of course things like Chewbacca or Lurking TIE Phantom. Shields as well are very hard to deal with. Yes, of course you have access to some cards like Piercing Shot that can help you with that, but just in general, if there's a critical mass of them, it's very hard for you to deal with. So decks like, for example, Gar Saxon that have half of their decks with shields, it could be quite hard for you to deal with. And of course, another thing we haven't mentioned here is upgrades. In general, a lot of other colors have easy access to cards that can 2-for-1 your opponent when they use upgrades. For example, Takedown on something that has been given a lightsaber, or Waylay. You don't have access to that. Most of your removal in these colors is damage based. So if somebody puts a General's Blade on turn 2, you can't easily get rid of it. You need to actually play Upgrade Hate. So let's go ahead and check out some of the notes or synergies and combos for this deck. So the most obvious one is going to be Vader with Purge Trooper. Vader in the past has always done 5 damage on ambush. If you are playing an Imperial deck with Veers, you could have been doing 6. In some niche cases with Death Trooper, if you're playing Vader with blue, yes, you could be doing 7. Well, there's no different here, except now you don't need to damage yourself. Vader is able to pull out a Purge Trooper and kill off any 7 health unit. And why is 7 health so important is because a lot of the very key strong cards in the meta right now, like for example Luke Anakin, most of the leaders have 7 health, and they are all Force. So that Purge Trooper is able to come down, Vader will deal the damage, Purge Trooper will finish it off, and now you have 2 bodies on board that they need to deal with. That is extremely powerful and can pretty much swing the game around, assuming you're not too far behind. Ramp is sometimes a trap. You don't want to sacrifice Port State for it. What I mean by this is that you are a deck that relies on having early board control. You need to develop stuff enough for your opponent to have to worry about it. If you are just leaving an empty board and your opponent is able to just hit your face without any concern, then by the time you get to your good late game cards like your leader or your Vader, then there might just be too much damage on your base, so you can't just blindly ramp. You need to be very careful about it. That's why we're not running resupply in the main board. We are running only Super Laser Technician, as it is able to sometimes help us win back the board. That 2 damage isn't huge, but it's sometimes enough. Snoke is very strong. You need to play around obvious removal. And the obvious removal that right now is, of course, Force throwing their own unit at you, so you need to try and make sure that they don't have access to a Force unit when you're deploying. Power of the Dark Side, obviously you don't want to flip open when this is the only unit you have. Rivals Fall, but of course most people don't main Rivals Fall, so in game 1 you're often safe enough to do it. It's just something you need to keep in mind. If you need to delay your deploy, it's not the end of the world. But just in general, something to keep in the back of your mind. And of course, Vinay and Snowtrooper can mess up your opponent's math. Something I forgot to mention earlier is the reason why we are running an Imperial package is not because the Imperials are the best villainy units. In fact, there's actually quite a few other units that you could be playing instead. But the Imperial package gives you access to cards like Snowtrooper that can really mess up your opponent's math. And what I mean by that is Vinay, as we mentioned earlier, is able to move around the experience on your side of the board in any way you want. A very cool combination that you can even do is if let's say you have a unit out with an experience and you play Vader, your Vader can choose to search the top 10 first, bring out that Vinay. Vinay can take that experience from your other unit, put it onto the Vader, and Vader just ambushed for 6. That's something that people just don't consider often enough. They'll be like, oh, hey, I just played a 6-cost unit. He can't Vader into it. We'll be fine. Or maybe if it's not even a Force unit that you can't Purge Trooper, this is just another way to get through that. And Snowtrooper is in the same way, is able to, if you have a Vinay, for example, on the first turn and your opponent drops a Yaddle, you can Snowtrooper to immediately get rid of it on the next turn, something that they probably did not consider. On top of that, when you use your Vader once again, you can pull out a Snowtrooper, allowing you to get 2 attacks in 1 action. Action compression is very strong in this game, and on top of that, it's just an extra 2 damage reach that you can just throw onto your opponent's base if you need to. Key thing to know that the Snowtrooper, while it does only give the extra 2 damage to an Imperial unit, it doesn't stop you from attacking with a non-Imperial unit. So if you Vader, you can still Snowtrooper and attack with your leader, you just won't get the extra 2 damage. And of course, as we mentioned, you have 18 to 24 damage worth of reach between your Ruthless Raiders and your Devastators. You should be relying on it. It's okay to lose the board halfway through the game if you have dealt enough damage to your opponent's base. If you have to only do an extra 8 damage to their base, sometimes it's best to just be like, hey, I'm going to hope that I draw the cards I need. If you have 6 to 8 cards in your deck that can help you get there, then those are pretty good odds, especially if you haven't seen them early on. So let's check out some of the matchups in the meta. What are you strong against and what are you weak against? We've alluded to some of this earlier on in the video, but into a bit more detail here, where you are pretty strong against slow force. And what I mean by slow force is decks that rely on the bigger boys, the big units. So things like Han 2, Yoda, or I mean, hey, if you're running into Raid, be my guest. But and just in general, decks that are a bit slower and use the force bases, you're pretty good against them because you are able to deny them the force starting from the mid game. So as long as you haven't been overrun in the early on turns, you're pretty good into that matchup. You're pretty good into mid range for the same reason. You are a mid-range deck that's a bit more on the slow side, so there's a very good chance that you'll be able to just outvalue your opponent with your big units. There's not many decks that can handle dealing with 3 Vaders, 2 Mauls, some Devastators, and if you want, you can even add some more into the side. Very often we'll have Great Dragons in the side, or sometimes the other Devastators in the side. You're just able to outlast a lot of mid-range decks. Hard control and soft control, I think both of these are extremely easy matchups for you. Just in general, green-red is very strong against control, and having access to all of that reach makes it so even if they're constantly trading 1-for-1 against you, it doesn't matter. You're going to come out ahead. You're going to be dealing out the damage. I don't think there will be many cases where they will be able to deck you out and slowly outvalue you. And of course, swarm decks. Swarm decks in general, other than one in particular that we're talking about into the week against, you're pretty good into it because you have a lot of small stuff yourself. You're able to trade off swarm for swarm, and on top of that, if you get a well-timed overwhelming barrage, you just shut down their entire deck. So things like Rex, for example, or Separatist decks, you usually will have an easy time into. What are you weak against? And the key thing, I think the only archetype that I'm actually concerned about playing as this deck is aggro. And by aggro, I mean obviously the big boys. I'm talking about Sabine, I'm talking about the aggro Kylo, and I'm also talking about Vader. And that's why I didn't specify Vader when I was talking about Swarm, is because it is a bit more of an aggro deck rather than a Swarm deck. As we mentioned, this deck has a hard time accessing healing. There are some Sentinels, but not good enough at the moment to hold back that aggro. So this is a pretty tough matchup. That doesn't mean it is impossible to play. It just means you need to play it very differently. Lucky for you, aggro decks usually don't have a lot of answers to your threats. So if you're able to stick a big enough unit early on, if you're able to buff up a trooper up to like 6/6, after that with a well-timed overwhelming barrage you can just take over the game, but it is still one of your weakest matchups. Tall decks in general are pretty tough as well. As we mentioned, there's no easy removal in this color scheme, so if you are playing against someone who's managed to pilot up a Millennium Falcon with 3 pilots and they're hitting you for 10, there's I'm afraid not much you can do. There are some cards you could be playing, of course, like Power Failure or Fang Fighters to help alleviate that, but this is just overall weakness of not just this deck but just these aspects in general. Ping Tarkin Town decks such as Cad Bane and Quinlan tend to be pretty fast. They are borderline aggro, Cad Bane a bit less. So it could, I guess, to a certain extent fall under aggro. Why is that a weakness of this deck? Is because very often you'll be focusing on buffing up your units, and if they time it properly and they are able to ping or Tarkin Town them down, they'll just outvalue you early on. They'll be able to just put too much stuff on the board and deal with your board very quickly. And like we mentioned earlier, your comeback potential is pretty tough. So unless you play it perfectly in the early game, this is a very tough matchup. And finally, we have fast force decks. The only one that I can truly think of in this situation is Mother Talzin. Mother Talzin plays very differently from other decks that use the Force in that it is less of a mid-range deck and more of just an early board control deck that then mid-range flips over into midway through the game flips over into aggression. You can pay more attention to that if you want in the other deck that I've done for Mother Talzin, but essentially decks that deck in particular is the only one that I mean by fast force, in that is able to completely control your board early on. All those negative stats kind of outdo your experience tokens, and if they are able to seal out the board from you early on, you have the same problem as the Quinlan decks. You can't come back when they already have a handhold in it. So now let's talk about some tech options. What are some good cards that you could be playing to fight off against the meta? Things that you can have in your sideboard potentially. So the obvious ones, there's going to be Shuttle ST-149, once again another Imperial card. What makes this really cool is that you can actually steal experience or shields from your opponents. There are a lot of shields this set. I mean, almost every single deck is running some form of shielding, and since shields are a weakness of ours, Shuttle is pretty good. comes in, has a shield himself, and steals a shield from an opponent's unit if you want, steals an experience if you want. But on top of that, it can also move around your own upgrades, so it can act somewhat like a Vanet in moving your stuff around, making your leader bigger, or taking stuff away from your big unit that you know is about to die onto something else. Bombing Run is a very obvious one of the best tools you have against aggro, and more specifically against Vader. This is why the Vader deck in general, I think game 1 is probably a horrible matchup, but starting game 2 and 3, I think the advantage is more in your court. Between 3 bombing runs and 3 overwhelming barrages, it's very hard for Vader to keep control of the board. And I think that just goes, that's just true for any red deck in general. And of course, we have Legal Authority, a card that hasn't seen too much use, but since you're buffing up your units into very high power, Legal Authority could be very useful, especially in, once again, dealing with those upgraded or shielded units. You have to remember that when you capture a unit, even when they get it back, they don't get the shield back, because shield is a when-played ability. Next up, against ramp decks, we have great cards like Champ Syndulla and Crate Dragon that every aggressive deck should want in their sideboards. This turns the ramp matchups from either even or a losing matchup into a pretty much, maybe not auto win, but into a very easy matchup for you. If your opponent spends 3 for a resupply on turn 2, and then you answer that with a Champ Syndulla on turn 3, you've now evened the odds, except you have a giant body in play. And Crate Dragon is just another big creature that they need to deal with after they've dealt with your Mauls, your Vaders, your Devastators, your Ruthless Raiders. I don't think they have much left at that point, so when you drop a Crate, usually it just seals the game. Now, Disabling Fangfighter, as we mentioned, upgrades are quite the weakness of this deck, so this is a no-brainer. Sometimes I would even put this into the main deck. Definitely worth considering. It is not a villainy card, but who cares? There are very, very few decks that run no upgrades whatsoever. And then moving on to the healing, we have Yularen and Salacious Crumb. This is some of your best healing package outside of Reinforcement Walker, and it is definitely worth considering. If you manage to get both of these units, potentially that's healing you for 2 every single turn. And Yularen is not villain, but Crumb is, so even if you don't need the healing, Salacious Crumb on turn 1 could be dropped as a 2/4, which is a pretty good stat line on your first turn. Yes, you'll probably lose the initiative, but sometimes that's not the end of the world. Sometimes you don't have it anyways. It's just a way to have some healing in a deck when your opponent might not expect it. So let's talk about a bit about alternative cards. We did mention that we are running the Imperial package, but that is not necessary for the deck. It just makes it easier, especially because of one of the most fantastic cards, which is Tarkin himself as a unit, a 4-cost 2/3 that lets you search your top 5 and get 2 cards. I think we are in a meta where everyone is trying to hit your hand, and as a command aggression villainy deck, you don't have many options for card draw. So Tarkin himself coming in and drawing you 2 cards is very, very similar to Ki-Adi-Mundi. That everybody knows is an amazing card. So yes, you're losing out a bit on stats. Instead of being a 4/4, he is a 2/3, but he is a targeted search rather than just a draw 2. He doesn't need the force. So honestly, I think it's a very fair comparison. The meta has slowed down a little bit, enough for a card like that to see play, and I think he is an MVP in this deck. All that said, if you don't want to run the Imperial package, or if you want to change some stuff up, here are some great cards you could use instead. Of course, we have Special Forces TIE Fighter, 2-cost 2/3 that could potentially come in ready. This card can sometimes single-handedly make that Vader matchup completely turn over into your favor. It's a great card that on turn 1 can come in ready, potentially versus some decks, get some stuff out, and it's villainy, you can buff it up. In the same vein, we have the TIE LN Fighter and the Kylo's TIE Silencer. Both of them are essentially 2-cost 3/2s. TIE LN Fighter could just be played as a 1-drop as well. Pretty good off of Vader. Just if you want more space presence, these are good options. Alternatively, if you want just raw stats in terms of cards, you can be playing Dengar even if you don't use the effect of an upgrade. On turn 1, this could be buffed with your leader ability to become a 1-cost 3/3. Fantastic stat line. And if we're talking about stats, you can do the same thing with the Guavan Antagonizer. Yes, there is a bounty, which is unfortunate, but this is still a turn 1 3/4. If they are not able to kill it immediately, that is quite the threat. And on top of that, it is Saboteur. It is helping deal with one of your weaknesses, which is shields. And of course, there's so many other options. You have the strike ship as well. That is basically a 2-cost 3/3, albeit that is with raid. There are so many more. I'm not going to name all of them. Just to give you an example of how you can modify the deck playing pretty much any villainy card you can think of. Now on to the 3 costs. Some interesting choices are Captain Eunuch. 3 cost 1/5, doesn't sound great, but for each trooper you have in your discard, he gets an extra power, and you will have a lot of troopers. Just in general, this color, especially red, has a ton of troopers. So I'd say usually by the turn you drop him, he's at least a 2/5, often enough a 3/5. When you pull him off late game with Vader, it's not uncommon for him to be a 6/5. Pretty good card for consideration. We have the Black Sun Starfighter. Once again, if you want a bit more oomph in space, he is a Sentinel, he is villainy, you can buff him. Great card. Knight of Ren, already a 3 cost 4/4. We've seen that Grand Inquisitor is good enough to be played as a 3/4 with raid 1, and this is no different. Once again, it is a villainy card, so you can buff it up if you want. This just really shows that this color scheme has so many just raw stats, and often enough, raw stats is what you need to win a game, especially when you're fighting off against another mid-range deck. So this is a card definitely worth considering. Next up, going into a bit heavier costs, we have the Eye of Scion. It has every keyword you could dream of. 6 cost 4/7. Add some restore to your deck. It can't be attacked back on the same turn. Just an overall fantastic card. An added benefit is that it has the same power as your leader. So on the same turn that your leader is flipping, you get to buff either this or your leader. It doesn't really pivot you in either way. Great card, and I think if the meta was a bit more space focused, I would consider playing this main deck. In the same vein, we have Imperial Interceptor, a card that's been pretty much a staple in red villainy decks, but I think that there's not enough space being played at the moment other than decks that go all in on it. At least not enough to have this in the main deck. Next up, we have Von Reich's TIE Interceptor, a card that was almost put into my main deck. It is a great card, 3 cost 3/4. Once again, a decent stat line. It is villainy, it can be buffed, and actually it has added benefits on whether if it's buffed. If you just give it 1 experience, it'll have Overwhelm, able to deal extra damage to your opponent's base if you're clearing out tokens, for example. And if you do manage to put like a Craving Power on it, you'll easily reach that 6 power, giving it an extra raid 1. It just gives you a lot of early aggression and helps you reach that critical massive damage on your opponent's base much faster. And finally, of course, we have Emperor Palpatine, a fantastic card. It has been seeing some play in Talzin decks, and it's no different here. He is Imperial, so you can search him out with Tarkin. You can buff him up if you need to. I just think that there's not enough room in the deck for that many late game units, especially considering Devastator fills the same niche. But this is a pretty decent card to consider nonetheless. And of course, we did mention this very, very early on in the video. Sorcerer's Blast, if you are playing the Force variant, is a great card. People often, when you're down to 1 resource, don't expect anything to be played. They don't expect removal. So being able to just randomly deal out 3 damage is extremely good, especially if you are maintaining card advantage with Tarkin. So with all that said, guys, that's everything for this deck tech. I would love to hear what you guys think about Snoke. I honestly believe that he is a sleeper pick right now. I think he is one of the strongest leaders in the game, and that's probably what I'll be playing for the next month. If you guys have any thoughts about this, please don't hesitate to let me know. And once again, if you enjoyed this, please comment, like, subscribe, all of that YouTube stuff, and please let me know what kind of content you guys would love to see. And I will see you guys next time.